I thought I was just being polite. I thought helping someone didn't mean hurting anyone else. Then my partner asked why I kept my phone face down. I said it was nothing. I said I was tired. I said work was stressful. What I didn't say was how fast I started protecting a secret, or how easy it became to lie by omission. That's when I realized this wasn't harmless anymore. I'm a woman in my early 30s, in a long-term relationship that looks solid from the outside. We live together, share routines, and talk about the future in that casual way couples do when they assume everything is fine. I wasn't looking for problems. I wasn't bored, lonely, or looking for attention. I wasn't trying to cross any lines. That's why it took me so long to admit I was already standing on the wrong side of one. This story isn't about cheating in the obvious way. It's about small decisions, quiet moments, and the kind of temptation that doesn't feel dangerous until it's already changed how people look at you. Before you judge, I want to know your thoughts. Leave a comment with what you think the real line is in situations like this. And if you relate to honest, uncomfortable relationship stories, subscribe and share this with someone who always has strong opinions about boundaries. It didn't start with attraction. It didn't start with flirting. It started with timing. I stayed late at work that day because I was behind on a project. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those evenings where everyone slowly disappears and the office gets quiet in that uncomfortable way. I was already tired, already thinking about going home, when my coworker stopped by my desk. We weren't close. We talked in meetings, exchanged polite jokes, sometimes complained about deadlines. That was it. If you had asked me that morning whether this person would end up affecting my relationship, I would have laughed. They asked if I had a minute. Their voice was low, careful. They didn't want anyone else to hear. I said yes automatically, assuming it was about work. Instead, they sat down and said, "I'm not doing well." There was a pause after that, the kind where someone is deciding whether to keep going or pretend they never said anything. I could have stepped in right there. I could have said I was sorry, but busy, I didn't. They told me their relationship was falling apart. Not in dramatic detail, but enough to make it clear this wasn't just a bad week. They said they couldn't talk to anyone at work. They said they felt embarrassed. They said they just needed someone neutral. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer advice. I just let them talk. At the time, it felt harmless. It felt human. Someone needed to unload, and I happened to be there. I told myself this was what decent people do. Before they left, they said, "Thanks for not making it weird." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. When I finally packed up and left, I noticed a message from my partner asking when I'd be home. I replied, "Leaving now. Long day." That wasn't a lie. But it also wasn't the whole picture. At home, my partner asked how work was. I said, "Busy. Same as always." I didn't mention the conversation. I told myself it wasn't important. I told myself it wasn't my story to share. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sneaky. I felt normal. But looking back, that was the first moment I chose to keep something to myself that involved another person's emotions, and I didn't stop to ask whether that choice belonged only to me. That night, I went to sleep thinking I'd done a small good thing. I didn't realize I'd just opened a door I wouldn't know how to close. What would you have done in my place? The next day felt normal, which is probably why I didn't question anything. At work, my coworker acted the same as always. Professional, polite, no sign that the conversation from the night before had changed anything. That actually reassured me. It made me feel like I hadn't crossed into anything personal, like it had been a one-time thing. Then, that night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from them. "Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say thanks again for yesterday." I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because the message was inappropriate, it wasn't, but because it felt direct, personal, like it belonged to a different category than work emails and group chats. I replied anyway. "No problem. Hope today was better." That should have been the end of it. A polite exchange. Closure. Instead, the conversation kept going. They said they were still overwhelmed, that things felt heavy, that they hadn't slept well. I answered with short responses at first, trying to keep it neutral. But the more they shared, the more it felt rude to disengage, leaving someone mid-sentence when they're clearly struggling. My partner was sitting next to me on the couch, scrolling through their phone, half watching a show. I was aware of my screen in a way I normally wasn't. I angled it slightly toward myself. Not to hide it exactly, just to keep it private. "Who's that?" my partner asked casually. "Someone from work," I said. "They're stressed." It was an honest answer. It just wasn't complete. My partner nodded and went back to the show, but I felt something tighten in my chest, a small, uncomfortable awareness that I had just decided how much information to give and how much to hold back. The messages continued for another 15 minutes. Nothing deep. Nothing dramatic. Just someone unloading thoughts they didn't know where else to put. At one point, they wrote, "I don't usually talk like this. I just feel safe with you." I didn't respond to that sentence directly. I sent something practical instead. Try to get some rest. Nights make everything feel worse, but that word stayed with me. Safe. When the conversation finally ended, I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. I told myself it was habit. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Later, when we were getting ready for bed, my partner asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." That was true. I was tired. But it wasn't just from work. As I lay there, I replayed the messages in my head, not because they were exciting, but because I liked how they made me feel competent, reliable, chosen. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong, but I noticed something that bothered me. I was relieved my partner hadn't asked more questions, and I didn't ask myself why. Do you think I crossed a line here? After that night, the messages didn't stop. They just blended into my routine so smoothly that I barely noticed when they became normal. A message in the morning. Something small, like "rough night," or "hope today's easier." Then silence during work hours. Then another message later. Usually after dinner. Always casual. Always framed as nothing urgent. I told myself it was fine because nothing about the content felt wrong. There was no flirting, no compliments, no lines crossed that I could point to and say, "This is it." That's what made it so easy to justify. But my partner started noticing things before I did. They noticed I checked my phone more often. Not obsessively, just enough to be visible. They noticed I responded faster than usual. They noticed I sometimes smiled at my screen and then immediately looked away when they glanced over. "Who are you texting so much lately?" they asked one evening. "Work stuff," I said. That wasn't a lie. It was just incomplete. The questions didn't come aggressively. They came gently, spaced out over days. "You seem distracted. Is something stressing you out? Did something change at work?" Each time, I gave an answer that was technically true but carefully trimmed. I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want to make it sound bigger than it was. Mostly, I didn't want to invite a conversation I wasn't ready to have. One night, my partner's phone died while we were sitting on the couch. They reached for mine without thinking and said, "Can I use yours for a second?" I reacted before my brain caught up. "I'll do it," I said quickly, already pulling the phone back toward me. They paused, just for a second, but I saw it. "Why?" they asked. I laughed, trying to keep it light. I already have it unlocked. They didn't argue. They didn't accuse me of anything. They just nodded and leaned back. But the mood shifted. Something quiet settled between us, like a question that hadn't been asked out loud. Later that night, after they went to shower, I went into my settings and turned off message previews on my lock screen. It felt like a practical move. I told myself it was about privacy, about not wanting notifications popping up at random times. But when I finished, I stared at my phone and felt a wave of discomfort I couldn't explain. I wasn't hiding messages because they were inappropriate. I was hiding them because I didn't want to explain why they mattered. That realization scared me more than if they had been explicit. When I got into bed, my partner turned toward me and asked, "Are we okay?" "Yes," I said immediately, but my answer came too fast, too rehearsed, because somewhere deep down, I knew I was starting to protect something that wasn't my relationship. And I didn't yet know how far I was willing to go to keep that protection intact. Was I wrong for not stopping it right there? The first time it felt different was the day my coworker asked if we could talk in person. They didn't say it dramatically. They didn't frame it as urgent. They just sent a message in the afternoon saying, "Do you have time to grab a coffee after work? I think it would help." I stared at that message longer than I should have. People get coffee after work all the time. Coworkers do it. Friends do it. There was nothing inherently wrong with the request, but something about it made my stomach tighten. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself this was still within normal limits. I replied yes before I could talk myself out of it. I didn't tell my partner right away. Not because I planned to hide it, but because I hadn't decided how to frame it yet. That alone should have been a warning sign. An hour later, as I was packing up to leave, I texted, "I'm grabbing coffee with someone from work. I'll be home a bit later." My partner replied, "Just that. No follow-up, no questions." And instead of feeling relieved, I felt uneasy. At the cafe, my coworker looked more fragile than usual, less put together, like they'd been holding it together all day and finally ran out of energy. They thanked me for coming as if I had done them a favor instead of just showing up. They talked. I listened. Again, they told me things they hadn't said over text, how alone they felt, how embarrassed they were by how much this situation was affecting them, how they didn't recognize themselves anymore. At one point they said, "You're the only person who hasn't made me feel like I'm overreacting." That sentence landed heavily. I felt useful, grounded, important. And I hated how much I liked that feeling. When it was time to leave, we stood awkwardly near the door. There was a pause. Then they hugged me. It wasn't long. It wasn't inappropriate in a way I could clearly define. But it was tight, familiar, like comfort, not obligation. I hugged back. The second I did, I knew I would replay that moment later. On the drive home, my thoughts were louder than the radio. I kept telling myself nothing had happened, and that was true. But I also knew I had just crossed into something that would be hard to explain without minimizing it. When I walked in, my partner asked, "How was coffee?" "Fine," I said. They looked at me for a moment and said, "You seem off." "I'm just tired," I replied. Again, not a lie, just not the full story. That night, I noticed myself checking my phone more often, half expecting a message. When it came, my heart jumped before I could stop it. And that's when it became impossible to ignore. I wasn't just supporting someone anymore. I was emotionally involved in a way that demanded energy, attention, and secrecy. I went to bed next to my partner, staring at the ceiling, realizing that whatever line I thought existed had already blurred. Do you think I crossed a line here? After the coffee, things shifted in ways I couldn't undo. Not outwardly, not in ways anyone at work would notice, but inside my head, everything felt louder. I replayed conversations. I caught myself anticipating messages. I started measuring my days by whether I felt useful to someone else. My partner noticed the change before I admitted it to myself. They didn't accuse me. They didn't check my phone. They didn't raise their voice. They just started asking questions that were harder to dodge. "You've been quiet lately. You seem somewhere else. Did I do something?" Each time I reassured them. I said no. I said everything was fine. I said work was draining me. But the truth was, I was emotionally tired in a different way. I was carrying someone else's weight, and I hadn't asked my partner if they were okay with that. One night, my partner asked, "Are you closer to them than you are to me right now?" The question stopped me cold. I wanted to say no immediately. I wanted to sound confident and offended. But the pause before I answered said everything. "That's not fair," I finally said. They didn't argue. They just said, "It's a yes or no question." I told them they were reading too much into it. I said I was just being supportive. I said it didn't mean anything. My partner listened quietly, then said something that made my chest tighten. "You keep explaining why it's harmless, but you don't explain why you're hiding it." I didn't have a clean answer. Later that night, my coworker messaged me again. Something small, something unnecessary, but I responded anyway, almost automatically. I didn't tell my partner about it. Not because I wanted to deceive them, but because I didn't want another conversation where I felt like I had to defend myself. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't choosing silence to protect my partner anymore. I was choosing silence to protect myself. The next day, my partner suggested we spend the weekend together. No phones, no distractions, just time to reconnect. I agreed out loud. But when my coworker messaged that same evening saying, "Can we talk tomorrow?" I'm not okay. I didn't hesitate before saying yes. And in that moment, I knew I was standing between two choices, and I had already leaned in one direction. Was I wrong for saying yes again when I knew what it might cost? Saturday was supposed to be ours. We had talked about it during the week. No errands, no work, no distractions. Just the two of us doing something simple. Coffee, a walk, maybe cooking together. Nothing dramatic, just intentional time. I woke up already tense. My phone was on the nightstand, face down. I knew there was a message waiting. I hadn't checked yet, but I could feel it. That quiet pull in my chest, like unfinished business. My partner was still asleep. I watched them for a moment and felt a sharp wave of guilt. This was the person who knew my habits, my moods, my history. The person who trusted me without checking my phone or asking for proof. I picked up my phone anyway. There was a message from my coworker sent early that morning. Short, simple. Today is really hard. Can you talk later? I stared at it longer than I wanted to admit. I told myself I would wait. I told myself I would prioritize my relationship today. I even put the phone back down and went to make coffee, trying to act normal, but the message stayed in my head. Every laugh with my partner felt delayed. Every conversation felt split, like part of me was somewhere else. After breakfast, my partner asked, "Are you okay? You seem distracted." I almost told the truth. I felt it rise up in my chest. The explanation, the honesty, the relief that might come with it. Instead, I said, "I just need to run out for a bit. There's something I forgot to take care of." They looked disappointed, but they didn't argue. That hurt more than if they had. "I thought today was for us," they said quietly. "It is," I replied too quickly. "I won't be long." I took the call in my car, parked a few blocks away. I told myself that made it better, less secretive, less disrespectful, even though the only reason I wasn't inside was so my partner wouldn't hear. My coworker sounded worse than before. Their voice was shaky. They said things felt unbearable. They said they didn't know who else to call. I listened. I reassured. I stayed on the line far longer than I planned. At one point, they said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Something in me twisted, because that sentence didn't feel like gratitude anymore. It felt like dependence, and part of me liked being the person holding everything together. When I got home, my partner was sitting on the couch exactly where I'd left them. The TV was on, but they weren't watching it. "Was it the coworker?" they asked. I hesitated. "Yes," I said. They nodded slowly and said, "So that's where I rank now." "That's not fair," I said, immediately defensive. They stood up and looked at me with a kind of calm that scared me more than anger. "I asked you for one day," they said. "Just one." I tried to explain. I said it was serious. I said someone needed me. I said it wasn't like that. My partner listened, then said, "You keep choosing them when you say you're choosing me." That night, we went to bed without resolving anything. They turned their back to me. I stared at the wall, fully aware that I had made a decision, even if I didn't want to admit it. And for the first time, I wondered whether fixing this would require losing something I wasn't ready to let go of. Do you think I crossed a line by leaving that day? The fallout didn't come immediately. It came quietly, in pieces. The first sign was at work. People started acting a little different around me. Not openly, not enough to complain about, just small shifts. Conversations that stopped when I walked by. A look held a second too long. A meeting where my name was mentioned in a tone that felt careful. Then my manager asked if I had a minute. They didn't accuse me of anything. They didn't bring up rumors directly. They just said something vague about maintaining professional boundaries and keeping personal matters from affecting the team. They asked if everything was okay. I said yes. I walked out of that office with my stomach tight, realizing that what I thought I had contained had already started to leak. Even if no one knew details, they knew something. That night, I came home to a quiet apartment. My partner was there, but the energy felt different, distant, like they were present physically, but already pulling away emotionally. I tried to act normal. I asked about their day. I made small talk. They answered politely, but without warmth. Later, I went to the kitchen and realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I found my partner sitting at the table, my phone in front of them. Not aggressively. Not like they had been digging. Just holding it. "I didn't mean to," they said before I could speak. It lit up. I saw the name, and I couldn't stop myself. My heart dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I didn't ask what they saw. I already knew it was enough. "I didn't cheat," I said immediately, too fast, too defensive. They looked at me and said something that still echoes in my head. "You keep saying that like it's the only way to betray someone." They handed the phone back to me. Their hands were steady. Their voice wasn't raised. "I don't care that you were kind," they continued. "I care that you were kind in a way that pushed me out." I tried to explain. I talked about timing, about empathy, about not wanting to abandon someone in crisis, about how it never crossed into anything physical. They listened. Then they asked one question that cut through every justification I had built. "Would you have told me any of this if I hadn't seen it?" I opened my mouth to answer. And then I stopped, because the honest answer was no. Not yet. Maybe eventually. Maybe when it felt safer. Maybe when I could control the narrative. But not now. Not fully. The silence between us stretched. My partner stood up and said, "I need space." Not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly. They packed a bag that night and went to stay with a friend. They didn't slam the door. They didn't threaten to leave forever. But the apartment felt emptier than it ever had. After they left, my phone buzzed. A message from my coworker. "Are you okay? You seem distant." I stared at the screen, realizing how twisted everything had become. The person causing the distance was now checking in on me because of it. And for the first time, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This wasn't about helping someone. This was about choices, and every choice had been mine. Do you think it was already too late at this point? The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore after my partner left. Everything was in the same place, but it felt staged, like I was walking through a version of my life that had already ended. Their mug was still by the sink. Their jacket was still hanging by the door. Proof that this wasn't a fight. It was a fracture. That night, I didn't sleep. My phone buzzed again, and again. Messages from my coworker, short at first, then worried. "Did I mess something up?" "You don't have to answer if now's not a good time. I just want to make sure you're okay." I stared at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. Before, those messages made me feel needed. Now they made me feel trapped. I typed out a response 3 different times, each version softer than the last, each one avoiding the truth. I kept wanting to say, "This isn't your fault," because that would let me stay the good person. But the truth was harder and less comforting. I finally replied, "Things at home are not okay. I need to step back." The response came fast. "I knew it. I shouldn't have leaned on you like that." Then another message. "I just don't know who else to talk to." That familiar pull came back. The urge to fix it. To reassure. To smooth things over so no one felt abandoned. But this time, I felt something else too. Anger. Not at them. At myself, because I had allowed this dynamic to grow. I had fed it with attention, silence, and excuses, and now I was shocked that it wanted more from me. I didn't respond right away. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and tried to trace the moment this became something I couldn't control. It wasn't the hug. It wasn't the messages. It wasn't even the coffee. It was the first time I chose secrecy because honesty felt inconvenient. The next day, my partner texted me, "I'm not trying to punish you. I just need to know if you understand why this hurt." I read that message over and over, because understanding meant accepting that I had caused real damage without intending to. That good intentions hadn't protected anyone, that I had been more worried about being seen as kind than being loyal. That night, I sent one more message to my coworker. I should have set boundaries earlier. I didn't. That's on me. I can't keep doing this. They didn't respond right away, and for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like relief. It felt like consequence. Do you think setting boundaries this late still meant anything? The next day felt heavier than all the others combined. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything finally slowed down enough for me to feel it. There were no urgent messages, no crisis to respond to, no one needing me in that specific, flattering way, just space. And in that space, I had to sit with what I'd done, without the distraction of fixing someone else. My partner asked if we could talk later that evening. Not to decide anything, just to talk. I spent the entire day rehearsing explanations in my head. Softer versions, clearer versions where I sounded reasonable, versions where I sounded remorseful but not guilty. None of them felt honest enough. When we finally met, they looked tired. Not angry, not dramatic, just worn down in a way that made me realize how long they'd been carrying this alone. They didn't start with accusations. They said, "I need you to tell me the whole truth, not the edited version." So I did. I told them how it started. I told them why I didn't mention the first conversation. I told them about the messages, the coffee, the hug, the phone calls. I told them how I kept choosing what felt easiest in the moment instead of what was fair. I admitted something I hadn't said out loud before. I liked feeling important to someone when I didn't feel seen enough, I said. Not in a romantic way, but in a way that still mattered. My partner nodded slowly, like they'd already known. They asked, "Did you ever want it to become more?" I answered honestly, "I don't think I wanted that." But I also didn't stop it when it started costing us. That answer seemed to hurt more than if I'd said yes or no. They told me the part that hurt the most wasn't the coworker. It was the way I made them feel replaceable. Like someone else got my emotional energy while they got my explanations. Then they asked the question I knew was coming. "Are you willing to cut contact completely?" I froze, not because I wanted to keep the connection, but because cutting contact meant admitting, fully, that what I did crossed a line serious enough to require consequences. It meant letting go of the version of myself that was just being nice. The pause was short, but it was there, and my partner noticed. They exhaled and said, "That hesitation tells me you're still choosing how you want to be seen over how this actually feels." That's when I realized something painful. Even now, I was still managing the situation instead of owning it. I said I needed time to think, and as soon as the words left my mouth, I saw the shift in their expression. Not anger, acceptance, like they were already preparing for the possibility that thinking might cost us everything. Do you think my hesitation said more than any explanation I gave? I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was waiting for a message, not because I was hoping for reassurance, but because there was nothing left to distract me from what I'd done. For weeks, I had been reacting, answering messages, explaining myself, managing emotions. Everyone's but my own. Now there was nothing to manage. Just a decision I had avoided for as long as possible. In the morning, I knew what I had to do. Not because it was noble, not because it would fix everything, but because anything else would just be another delay. I sent one last message to my coworker. I didn't justify myself. I didn't soften it. I didn't frame it as temporary. I said I was sorry for not setting boundaries sooner. I said I had allowed something unhealthy to grow. I said I could no longer have personal contact outside of work, and that this wasn't negotiable. The reply came later than I expected. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was just one sentence. "I thought you cared more than this." I stared at it for a long time. Because I did care. That was the problem. I had confused caring with responsibility, and kindness with access. I had told myself that good intentions mattered more than impact. They don't. At work, I kept things strictly professional. No private conversations, no check-ins, no emotional space. It felt cold, but it also felt honest. Then I met my partner. I didn't defend myself this time. I didn't explain my motives. I didn't argue about definitions. I told them I understood why they felt betrayed. I told them I had crossed a line even if I hadn't named it that way before. I told them I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I was asking for the chance to rebuild, slowly, with transparency, and without shortcuts. They listened quietly. Then they said something I wasn't prepared for. "I don't think you meant to hurt me, but intention doesn't undo damage." They said they needed time. That time might lead to repair, or it might lead to walking away. They weren't threatening me. They were protecting themselves, and I finally understood that this was the real consequence. Not losing the coworker, not the awkwardness at work, but losing the certainty that my relationship would survive my choices. We're still talking, carefully. Some days feel hopeful. Some days feel like starting from zero. I don't know how it will end, but I do know this. I can't call myself loyal just because I avoided the obvious mistakes. Loyalty lives in the quiet decisions, the boring honesty, the moments where no one is watching, and I failed there before I ever realized it mattered. Do you think I made the right choice in the end? If you enjoy real, thought-provoking Reddit-style stories, subscribe to the channel for more.